Hi everyone, it's Chris, and today I'm sharing a selective inking card that I have made using a new stamp from Brutus Monroe, and I have been using my original MISTI to use this. My MISTI is from My Sweet Petunia, and here is this wonderful new stamp from Brutus Monroe. Actually, it's new to me. It has been out for a little while. It is called Rustic Door, and I love it. It has so much detail in this stamp, and it just reminds me of kind of a European or Mediterranean scene, and just kind of that arched doorway and stucco covered brick, and I just loved it, and I knew immediately that I wanted to paint it. So I'm going to show you this technique that I use today, and it is selective inking, and I am going to be using distress inks to start out with. I am stamping on Artistico cold press paper. It's by Fabriano, and it's 140-pound watercolor paper. And I'm using my distress ink cubes to ink this up very slowly. I'm building up color, and I have started out with antique linen, which is going to give me that really soft inking, and I will be able to almost no line color with this quite easily. And I am just inking up the frame of the doorway and the door. There is some greenery in here, and I have started to add a little bit of color with that. And I'm using Mowed Lawn Distress ink for the greenery. And I can see as I do just little bits at a time where I need to add more ink. And I'm even using that plastic, the carrier sheet that came with the stamp. I can hold that right over the stamped image, and I can see what I need to ink and where I need to ink each color. I can show all the little greenery of that, kind of those topiaries that are climbing the edge of that wall. And now that I have added most of my color, I'm going to do a little bit of painting. And first I'm just using a water and my paintbrush, and I am just re-wetting the ink on my watercolor paper. This is going to loosen up that distress ink and bring out that color. And I'm just washing that color away from the image and coloring the wall. I want kind of this stucco-y wall and just very soft colors. So I'm just grabbing some of that antique linen ink and pulling it outwards. I'm being very careful not to hit that Mowed Lawn ink because I don't want to pull that green out into the wall yet either. So I'm just loosening the ink, kind of rehydrating that ink and spreading that color. And I want to keep some shadows here and there. I'm looking at my the carrier sheet so I can see where the little planters. There's some planter pots for the topiaries. I'm leaving those. And before I start to the green, I wanted to make sure that the antique linen was dry, so I just hit it with my heat gun. And now I'm going to kind of spread out that green a little bit. Mowed Lawn, as I realized, is a little bit greener than I probably should have used. I probably should have gone with a little lighter color, but it turned out okay in the end. So you may want to, if you do this, you may want to choose a lighter color green than I did. And I dried the green, and now I'm going to be adding a little more color, and I'm going to be using that distress ink, and I'm going to add more ink in the doorway, and you can see that I'm kind of adding some extra shadow. And what I've done there is I used tea dye ink to add a little bit more color, and now I'm going to loosen that up with my brush and pull that into the doorway. I want a very weathered antique door, wooden door. So I've added more color, and then I'm going to even take my ink cubes and I took the other plastic for the carrier sheet, and I'm using that as a palette, and I'm just put some tea dye and some antique linen. I just squished the little mini ink pads right onto that plastic sheet, and I'm using that as a palette. I'm just picking up some more ink and adding more color. I'm painting those little flower pots, trying to give a little shadow there, and then just pulling all that color out into the wall and into the sidewalk. This is such a fun way to do some watercoloring. I just love using distress inks, kind of stamping with them first and then just using water and more ink to watercolor. It's simple and fun, and I already have all the colors. So now I'm just going to dry this, and then I'm going to be stamping the details back in. I've left my stamp in place on my MISTI, so it is already lined up, and I know I'm going to stamp in the exact same space. So I am using now Brutus Monroe inks, and I'm going to be adding those details right back into right over where I've painted. So I am starting with suede ink, and you notice I have a baby wipe ready there. So I'm kind of watching carefully to make sure that I'm not overlapping and working too far out of the area. I'm just adding colors and details back into the door right now. Started with suede, and then I moved to maple, and then eventually I'm going to get even darker with the macchiato ink, which is going to put all of those wood grain details right back in. So just by doing a little bit at a time, you can really control your color and where where the details are working in here. Now I'm going to work on the door frame. This is sidewalk ink, and it is a real pale, kind of a chalky color, which is going to lighten up all of those lines that I kind of blurred out again with the water and the distress inks. And then I'm going to add some color to the greenery too by using cabbage and Jurassic. And that is going to put the details and a little shadowing back in. I use the Jurassic kind of on the right side of that image to put some details towards the bottom of the greenery. So now I have dried that ink, and I actually used a deckled rectangle die, which is something I've had forever from Spellbinders, and I cut this panel. Now I want to add my sentiment, and my sentiment is from an old paper tray ink set. It is from Year of Flowers Carnations, and it's just kind of one of those generic thinking of you sentiments that I use quite often. And after I got my sentiment added, I realized that I still need a little more contrast. So I've decided to come back and paint again. I added some more tea dye and kind of darkening a little bit of the colors, bringing the shadows a little bit deeper just so I have more contrast. And I can paint right over the Brutus Monroe inks because they are color fast with water, and they are a chalk ink and they really stay put. So I'm able to add some more details over the top of that ink. My sentiment was also done with the macchiato Brutus Monroe ink, so I don't have to worry about that bleeding either. So here I'm just deepening these shadows and kind of giving it a little bit warmer tone to it, adding more of the tea dye, and there is also a little bit more of the weathered wood. And then as I'm working on this, I kind of realized that the weathered wood is a little bit more cooler tone than I originally expected it to be. So I'm going to be trying to add a little bit more warmth to that. So I'm going to use a little bit of pumice stone, which is a really warm gray, and I'm going to pull more shadow in with that color, a little bit more on that sidewalk, on the step, just some behind the greenery and along the edge of that arched door frame, just to kind of warm up that color. It kind of balances that weathered wood that I originally put on, which is a little more bluish green, and the pumice stone is more of a warm gray. So just by adding that, it gives me a little more contrast and gives me more of that warm tone than I wanted for this stonework of the doorway. And this is another thing that I love about the distress inks is they're so flexible. I can kind of re-wet and I can pick up colors and I can change my mind and change things up really easily. So And this is probably one of my favorite watercolor techniques, is just using my distress inks. So now that I've gotten a little bit more contrast with these colors, I am very close to be finishing my card. So once it's dry, I'm going to add a little Brutus Monroe glue and attach it to a buff colored card base. And there it is. Thanks for watching, everyone. Enjoy your day.